Hey everybody, Sujin Patel here. I've got Dana from Echo Listening Intelligence. Really excited to talk to you guys today. Dana comes from a sales background, managed multiple sales teams, been a sales executive at numerous companies, and she's going to talk about listening. And this is, I think, a really important, undervalued, I guess a lot of people don't do this. So Dana, without further ado, do you mind just telling folks what you do, your company, and then we can jump in?
Yeah, thanks, Sujan. So I just want to give you a little background of how I got here, because I think that's always helpful to people. After managing multiple different sales individuals and teams, what I noticed was anyone can come to the table and learn their product or service and be really strong in what they know about the ins and outs of that. But when they came to a prospect, got into conversation with clients, it really came down to the way they communicated. And a lot of times their communication would either really push the sale forward or totally bomb it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I started observing that, and I took all kinds of courses on communication. And in that day, there was only leadership communication. So did all this studying and started really developing my teams, my individuals about communication. Long story short, everything's about listening. Everything's about speaking in leadership communication. You know, how do you teach people to be accountable? How do you present? How do you do all these things? And listening was totally gone from the whole equation. So I jumped in there and started looking at it. And that was like the beginning of how we got here.
I love it. My wife and I always joke. It's like, are you listening or are you just waiting for your turn to talk? Right. So
Yes.
totally. So, I've done some research. I've read a lot of your stuff. I've listened to a few podcast interviews done. And just so that the audience here gets the most kind of value, I think it's probably best to start with the types of listeners or types of kind of the framework around it. So maybe you can just start by explaining those four different types, and then we can jump in from there.
Yeah, that sounds great. So if you go back to when I was doing a lot of communication work, I was trying to figure out why was certain communication styles really working with certain clients and others were not. And it was really clear to me that people pick up different information. Everyone can hear the exact same meeting, and then they walk away with different little pieces of information they picked up. So we started researching and studying listening, and what we found out is listening is a brain-based function. So we hear with our ears auditorily, but all the information, the way we pick it up is how we translate it with our brains. And no two brains are alike. So everybody picks up different information. What we listen like to and for is different from person to person. So that's how it all started. And then we started trying to really bucket and look at what buckets did people listen from. And we came down with 4 to make it easy to digest and to really simplify listening. We created these 4 buckets. And would you like me to share them?
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay, so at a very high level, if you're listening, you might want to write down connective, reflective, analytical, and conceptual. And then back to the top. Connective is when you listen for what is important to other people. It's an external type of listening for what is important to my team, to my client. It's external. Reflective, on the other hand, is what's important to me. What has been my experience? It's very reflective internally.
Mm-hmm.
Analytical is exactly the way it sounds. It's spreadsheet kinds of conversations, facts, figures, things that you can prove. And then lastly, conceptual is big picture, ideation, possibility, brainstorming. And so those are the 4 ways that people listen. And we all have a portion of that in our listening makeup. I would say the other important, real basic around listening is that it's a habit. And so we can shift it. Mm-hmm. And if we start to learn how we listen in those 4 types, then we can start to realize how we want to shift for different situations.
Got it. And so, I mean, this sounds like common sense, but I'm assuming there's different approaches for those different types of listeners. And then would people have different parts, like they may be 50% connective and then another 50% analytical, or are they 100%?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. So What we did is developed an assessment, and so it's called the Echo Listening Profile. And so online you can answer 10 questions that are forced choice, and it will give you your profile and it will show you how you listen.
Mm-hmm.
So if you look at a sales individual, why this is critically important is listening being a brain-based function shows us how people think because it's brain-based. So what they're thinking about is what they're listening to and for.
Mm-hmm.
And then what we think about is also what we're going to talk about. So we think everything starts with listening. And if you understand how you listen, you can get a pretty good sense about how you're going to communicate with others. So in those 4 habits, we find people who are single dominant, who just love to connect with others. They're highly connective. That's just their dominant listening habit, all the way to double dominant, triple dominant, and people who we call flexors, who listen for all 4 back and forth all the time. And guess what? They talk the same way. So they're listening in all these 4 different areas. And then when they go to share information, they're all over the board. And so if you can listen and if you can learn your own listening profile, that's the start.
Mm-hmm.
And in sales, then you can start to, after you get a sense of these 4 habits, you can start to observe others and pick up words they use, body language they have. If you're in person, over the phone, you can tell by their tone of voice, their pauses, like I said, the words they use, the questions they ask. You can start to understand your audience's listening profile. And so the end result is we want you to learn to shift to speak into your audience.
Gotcha. So that's amazing, right? I think you just never think like I talk the way I listen, right? I think I listen the way I don't know. So I always kind of think of it the other way around, but you're right. That is exactly, it's my inner monologue that's coming out, right?
That's right, yeah.
But so when your company, or just in general, when people want to apply listening to their company, let's just say they're just getting started, would they hire you guys, or however, your engagements work? Would you be giving these surveys to potential customers, folks within the organization? Or I guess, like, how do you get this on your customers or potential customers, your prospects?
Yeah, sure. Well, so first of all, we still have our whole focus is in sales. So what we really want sales individuals and sales organizations to first understand is that listening is 50% of the communication equation. In sales, it should be higher because, quite frankly, if we let our prospects and our clients speak, we can get the information we need to then tailor what we're going to share with them back to what their needs look like. So we work with sales teams in all different size companies. And what we do is we teach them first what their listening profile looks like, whether they take the assessment or they self-assess. We can work them through a half-day workshop or something of that nature. But what we're really out for people to understand is that listening is not about being good or bad listeners. It's about understanding what you do tend to focus on, how you do take that information in, and is it appropriate for the situation you're in. So, for example, I'm sure our audience sells into all different markets. It could be hospitality, could be an engineering firm. They could be selling into financial services, whatever their main focus for their client base is. Some of them have real commonalities in their listening. If you look at a financial institute, they're going to be very analytical. If you look at hospitality, restaurants, hotels, very connective. They relate to people. So we can take some broad stroke assumptions and start there. But what we say is, you as the salesperson, it's your job to shift your message, not the meat of your message, but how you share it with your audience. And you can do it through quickly identifying their listening capabilities.
Yeah, I love it. That makes complete sense. And so you're kind of taking those types of listeners and turning them into more profiles, if I understand correctly. And
Yes.
then the salesperson can tailor that message, because they may want to focus on features 3, 4, and 5 instead of 1, 2, and 7, right? And that's not just like, basic sales knowledge and experience tells you, like, yeah, you should understand what your customer wants. But this is more of like, you're doing it from a listening and a different perspective. I think ultimately, combined with understanding your customer, just gives you way, way better chance of success. So I want to tie this back into sales. I know we've been talking about this. So I guess like, do you have an example maybe you can share of like how folks have applied it? Any, maybe a company, or let's say you're selling your some SaaS software. Like how would you kind of start to take that? How would you start to apply listening in context?
Well, so I have an example of a recent situation that happened to a woman who's certified in our work. So she does sell technology, and she said that she always builds these beautiful decks that to her, she takes time and pride to make them look really good, to be very, I don't know, just savvy. And she's highly conceptual. So she loves to brainstorm and ideate, and they're colorful and lots of pictures. And she said one of her larger prospects, she just couldn't like connect with him. He would continually accept another meeting with her, but they weren't moving any of the sales forward. And so she started thinking, she got certified in her work, started thinking about what his listening seemed to be like. His questions were very short and choppy, like, how does this work? Prove it. And so she started realizing that he was very analytical, but might also be reflective, which is internal. How is this important to me? Went back and said she took her whole deck apart and cut it down to like 3 slides, made it black and white, made the bullet points feature benefit, like straightforward. If you do this, these are the outcomes. She said the next meeting that she had with him, the guy said, I don't know what you've done differently, but now I get what you do. She said that her whole sales trajectory just went straight up, not over and over, but because she started to create things more with her clients listening in mind rather than what she wanted to share in her own way. So that's one.
Absolutely. I love it. Yeah. I think it's right. It's you can, somebody can hear what you're saying, but then if they don't comprehend it, or it doesn't resonate, it's just like, I don't know. Well, next question, please. Or like, oh, cool. And something she must have done got her to get that person to want to talk to her again, but clearly didn't move it forward.
Yeah, well, she's a very excitable woman. She's really full of a lot of enthusiasm. And she said that this gentleman would be looking down a lot, kind of looking at spreadsheets and things, and he wasn't really paying attention. And these are all signs for an analytical listener. And then when she changed her slide deck to facts and figures with just 3 bullet points, and he was all connected with her and all more enthusiastic about the presentation because it was in his language. Had nothing to do with that he didn't like the other one. It just didn't relate to him in a way that he could comprehend the information.
Gotcha. Yeah. So that totally makes sense. I want to talk a bit about the different types of mediums, sales would be done in, right? So there's in-person, phone call, Zoom, video conferencing, what have you. And then I think there's probably not another medium here, but like it's one to many. Maybe you're meeting with like 3 people, the CEO, the decision maker, and, someone else, right? Or some, a group of people. I'll table that for a second, but how does listening change per medium? Like does it change? I mean, you can't tell body language on a phone, right?
That's right. So we have to pick up different cues. So if you look at the work we've done in how to recognize another listener in your audience, there are a couple of things we do. If you're in person, there's a lot more cues that you can pick up. But by the way, body language is not what we think it is. And we might get into that later, but I just want to let you know, be careful, everyone, when you think you're reading body language. So I'll put that aside. To answer your question, of course, the more senses we have in a conversation, the more we can pick up. However, I will tell you, because listening is a brain-based function, the way people read, the way they hear words is very similar. So if you've got a very analytical, dominant listening buyer, and you're writing to them, you want to do the same thing. You don't want to ask them how their weekend was, how their kids are. You want to get right to the point, something more like, as promised, here is X, Y, and Z. Let's do a follow-up call at this time on that date. And you might close with something like, and hope you had a great weekend. If it were a connective dominant prospect. You might start the thing out, with, hey, the weather here's been great. What's your weekend been like? I remember you said you love dogs. Did you get to that dog show? Like really personalizing things so you're connecting with them. And then you get into, by the way, here's some points that we said we wanted to hit. I've attached these things. Let me know if you have any questions, much more verbal. It changes when you are in different ways of connecting or communicating, but you want to remember that the brain of the buyer is still going to pick up similar types of words, questions, and statements. So
yeah, absolutely. I think I want to go back to the body language thing, because I think when we were talking in prior to recording, we talked about that example, like an analytical person may look down or away from you, and that might seem like they're disengaged or don't care, but that's just how they function, right? Maybe that's just how they listen.
Yeah. Well, so we can't get an audience reaction, but how many times have you been with that new prospective client and you just hit it off? You're chatty, you're like getting along, they're giving you a lot of eye contact, they're nodding a lot, and you think you got it in the bag. However, you go back and then all of a sudden they're a little bit harder to get a hold of. And when you do, there's a lot of small talk, but you're not talking facts and figures about how to move the sale along, or you're not getting that next advance. What we notice is that the body language of, say, a connective listener, dominant connective listener, they're more about connecting with you and listening for connection than they are about moving the product or sale along, even internally for them to make their job, to buy. However, on the flip side, if you look at a reflective listener, they, as a buyer, might not look at you. They might have their arms crossed. They might be looking up in the air. But what they're doing is they're reflecting internally on the information that you've shared with them. They could be very quiet. They might say, thanks for your time, Sujan. I've got to think this through. And then the following week, you could literally get a PO. Like they could send you a purchase order, because they are, and their body language could be very, very different. Analytical, like I said, very quiet body language. They look down a lot. They could pull a laptop out in the middle of a meeting that you're having with them, and they could be doing work because they want to be, things
absolutely
done. I mean, they're just, and you'd feel like you had no connection with them.
Absolutely. I'm so pumped right now. I want to go back to our sales team and just tell them, hey, we got to add the listening element to our ICP's, ideal customer persona or profile, and then change up our SOPs. So we've got, like, I'm crazy for just having processes for everything.
Yes.
So my bar for sales is like a Starbucks barista. They have a high standard, a good interview process. Starbucks barista should be able to sell, and maybe not immediately, but in a week. And that's how good our SOPs have to be. But anyways, I want to go back and change our SOPs and saying, like, change intro based off of listener profile, right? Because, like, you could, a lot of how I've done sales, and my background's in marketing, I fell into sales, has been that, like, talking to the connector, right? And that's the persona I'm always talking to, like, hey, how was your weekend? Like, my kid was blah, blah, blah. And, like, really trying to build that rapport as if that was the only persona and that was the only type. But I'm like, crap, there's the analytical one. And as you're talking, or the reflective one, that I recall this customer I talked to, and I'm like, I ended the call, I was like, man, and it was an existing customer who wanted to just, like, they'd been using the product, but they wanted to talk to us and give some feedback and pretty much expand the relationship. I left that call. I was like, man, I just blew that call. And my partner was on it, and he's like, no, yeah, he didn't give a crap about you. He doesn't want to know about your family or what you do or, like, your passion behind the thing. He just wanted to know facts, figures, and information. And I went into the call wanting to build rapport. So, like, that call was destined to fail. And I wish I would have applied some of this information, and not some. I wish I would apply this framework, right? Because this sounds like this can drastically change your approach, right, of everything you do.
Yeah, a couple of years ago, we worked with a call center. truth be known, which we weren't aware of, but operations took over the call center, which number one, kind of a bad switch internally for that company. The operations manager was facts, figures, analytics, get it done. And so they started hiring and developing their sales call center team to be quick on and off the phone, especially in the height of the season.
Yeah.
Their was bombed.
Sounds like a recipe for disaster, right?
It was a recipe for disaster.
Yeah.
They brought us in and we started building client scenarios of in the first 3 to 5 seconds, what that person calling in said. Did they use I statements? Did they say we? What were the questions they asked? We could quickly identify at least a portion of their dominant listening habits so that the person on the phone could mimic their listening capabilities and make the sale aligned with the fabric of the listener's thinking through their listening. And it wasn't day one, but within 2 or 3 days, we were doing all kinds of role playing, and we got the whole team back on this way of, okay, it's not about getting it done quickly. It's about meeting the customer, which we all know, meet the customer where they are. But the tools that we have and the frameworks that we use to do that are critically important. So yeah, I mean, there are things we can teach you, and I'll just very quickly go through Connective. They're going to say things like, how might we work together? They use a lot of open-ended we kind of statements. They'll talk about how will that affect my team? They'll use empathy. Reflective, they're going to say, how do I get to goal? What's this going to mean for me? They'll use very internal questions about themselves. I need to get here. You'll hear it. And they're not at all, what's the word? It's not because they're about themselves. It's what they listen for. Mm-hmm. Analytical, they're going to call you out, very short, choppy sentences. And then conceptual, they're going to talk about possibility and how might we, and hey, I want to get here. And it's someplace out in the stars, So you can quickly pick up stuff and identify by the questions and words that people use if you start to listen for them.
I love it. Yeah. So if I understand correctly, that's what you do in the first part of the call, maybe even can you do that before the call? Like, can you do that via email, or written communication?
That's the way we try to set up sales teams for success is to set up every call with purpose, method, outcome. And you do it through, so Sujan, what's the purpose of our time that we get together? And if we were smart, what would we like to make sure we accomplish together? If you write that or ask them and the way they respond to you, you will have your answer.
Love it. So the question is like, say that one more time, the purpose?
Purpose, method, outcome.
Okay.
And you kind of go, what's the purpose of our time together? And then what are the outcomes we want? How would we know we were successful together? And then the person's asking, builds the method in the middle. Okay, so if we want to get here, let's make sure we hit these 3 points. These would be the major milestones of our
right. And that's what you adjust essentially based off that person, right?
Exactly right.
Gotcha. And you set it up where they're just telling you everything in advance. Love it.
Yep.
That's amazing. I'm asking you because I want to go use this.
Yeah.
I want to take this for a stroll on a sales call. I don't do sales at my company, but like I'm gonna do a sales call and just try to figure this out. But I do want to talk to you. You've actually answered a lot of questions before I asked them, so I'm glad this conversation has flowed well. But I do want to talk to you, and this is really my last question on how listening connects via written copy. Like what I mean is, in an email, like let's just say you're doing all email communication, or mostly email communication, and the person, let's say you do have a handshake deal, and it's that's the in-person meeting. How does this happen? Can you apply listening through email?
So let me just back up a little bit because I think this is where you're going. One of the things that we do, if you don't know an audience, you want to hit all 4 aspects of listening. Mm-hmm. So in email, whether it's in email or in person. So if you don't know, you're going into a new audience and you're going in and there are multiple buyers, you want to always start with facts, always, because you lose the analytical listeners first and you build credibility with them first. So if you are going into a situation, whether it's in writing or whether it's in person, you want to start with the facts. Given that we know X, Y, Z, I believe we're here because of ABC. You
Got
want to lay it out. Then in writing, if you do know your audience, you want to play with it. Like we were kind of doing before. Hey, do you know they're very connective? Like what we see a lot of times is these 4 habits sort of join together in a certain way. You'll see connective, conceptual people. So they love to ideate and they love people. So they're blah, 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 blah. They just love to have conversations. If you know that's the kind of buyer you're writing an email to, you want to get in there with that. Like, hey, I've been thinking about, what we talked about the other day, and here's some ideas, and this is how it would work with your team. What do you think?
Mm-hmm.
You would never write that to a reflective or analytical buyer because they would be, don't waste my time.
Right.
So you want to write in the same way that you would speak to them with the same, obviously a little tighter, but you want to make sure you get there.
Gotcha. And I guess that's fantastic. I think that was kind of a follow up, but I think what I was trying to get to is, let's say you have communication back and forth with somebody. Does that same concept you mentioned about listening and asking the purpose, method, outcome, can you figure that out from someone's typing? Can someone write out the way they listen?
Yes.
Love it. So you're just looking for the exact same thing, but in words. Is that right?
Yeah. So we do purpose, method, outcome to try and get to that. Yes.
Got it.
And we do it through a process where we get 2 things done. One, it sets up the agenda for the meeting.
Yeah.
Without them really knowing, but that way you can get on course with them. And number 2, if they write back 3 bullet points, let me tell you something. They're all about getting to the business and getting off the call.
That's the analytical person, right?
Yes.
The bullet, yeah, got it. Okay, cool.
If they write, I need to make sure my team gets to here and I need tools so that I can be successful.
Yeah.
You got to talk to them through. So here's what I understand, Sujan. This is your responsibility and you really want to make sure you hit these goals. So let's talk about how you can be successful. So you're going to give them the same content. So yes, you can totally hear it in the way they write back to you.
I love it. I'm just like thinking and recalling so many sales conversations gone wrong. Somehow most of these I've closed, but like some of these conversations I'm like, oh man, totally missed a boat on that. So awesome. So thank you very much for joining. I got a lot of nuggets. I'm going to go chat with my team right now and try to get some of this stuff implemented, and also make sure they listen to and read up on all your content. But for the folks that, that are listening or watching, where can they find you? Where can we keep in touch and learn more?
Yeah. So our website's super easy. It's echolistening.com. However, I'd love to make an offer to the audience that's listening and say, if you shoot me an email, it's just Dana, D-A-N-A, at echolistening.com. And you put in the subject line, Mailshake, and just put a quick, hey, I'd like to take the assessment. I'll have somebody on staff send you the link to the link to our assessment. It's 10 questions and we'll send you your profile. I got to put a little timeline on that. So let's say by the end of September, for those of you who are here, just if you put Mailshake in that subject line, then I'm happy to send you an assessment. And once again, the way you get to us is echolistening.com.
Awesome. Thank you, Dana. Very, very awesome. I'm just pumped up, ready to go listen. I'm going to listen like I've never listened before, because now I know what to look for. So thanks again. And we'll catch you around.
Okay, great. It was wonderful being here. Thanks.